Our teacher is somewhere in that crowd of Warsaw workers on their way to office, factory, and school. There she is, Barbara Swirsewska, a single girl of 25, a BA graduate of Warsaw University.
Very attractive, very chic.
The sort of teacher that every small boy falls in love with, and some bigger ones too.
Indeed. This Polish sequence is a little different from the others. It's more of a dramatic documentary, recreating an incident in the daily round of this teacher. And this small boy, lurking by the fence, figures largely in the incident.
Is he a truant?
Yes, he is. Well, we'll see more of him later. First, the Swirsewska and her pupils.
Z czytanki wybraliśmy te zdania, które określają nam ludkę.
This class is described as a second-term class, roughly grade 2, I gather. The children are 8 to 9 years of age.
Tylko Kasia?
The teacher's economic status seems fairly high in Poland. Miss Swirsewska is paid $337 a month, all 12 months of the year, but she's still below the average for elementary and secondary school teachers, which is $431 a month. That's slightly more than the average salary of all state and public institution employees, which is pretty good.
Dobrze, zapiszemy i to zdanie.
Why, they're very fine-looking children.
They are fine-looking. This looks like the Nob Hill of Warsaw, something rather special.
Well, all the countries concerned declare that they've given us typical examples of teacher in school, but I suppose all are putting their best foot forward in terms of appearances.
Proszę o spokój, nie krzyczcie.
This significant look signifies that the absence of a small boy has been noticed. And here he is. The plot is thickening.
I'm very pleased that the Poles were willing to send us a film of a boy playing hooky. It humanizes the stereotype picture some of us have of the totalitarian state.
Yes, and it also gives us an opportunity to look around Warsaw a little in young Casimir's company. Playing hooky, as I remember it, was always very exciting for the first half hour, and then it became aimless and boring.
Yes, you began to miss school.
Exactly.
But Casimir seems to be enjoying himself.
Meanwhile, back at the school, work goes on. Well, this teacher seems to be a very warm, outgoing person.
Yes, you can tell by the children's interest.
Mm-hmm. What do we know about Polish educational standards, Professor Seeley?
I don't know too much, but judging by the scale of the teachers' salaries and by their professional qualifications, and even more by the Polish scientists and artists and intellectuals, which are the product of the schools, I think one could assume that the standards are good and high. Lots of rapport here.
I imagine that hand on the doorbell tells you what to expect now.
A parent-teacher get-together.
Right. There's the subject for discussion. Casimir, understandably a little apprehensive.
Oh, he's being a very good boy right now.
Oh, he's diligent about his chores, very conscientious. Apparently, he played hooky only because he hadn't done a homework assignment and didn't want to face his teacher.
The father isn't present.
No, we don't see him. He's apparently a strict disciplinarian, so it's perhaps lucky for Casimir that his mother talks to the teacher. This is a working-class family. The father is a driver. It's somewhat of a struggle for both parents to make ends meet. And probably there isn't too much time to supervise the children very closely. One gathers the mother works at home as a seamstress. While things must be going well, he looks a little less alarmed, doesn't he? Now, in contrast to Casimir's home, we attend a birthday party in the home of a scientist whose son is one of Miss Svirsevska's pupils. But she, as you see, has come to the party. This strikes me as being a little unusual. I would have thought that European teachers were more aloof, less socially involved with pupils.
Well, it would be very unusual in Germany or France or England, but in Poland, maybe it's the thing.
Maybe it is. There's a demanding task for a teacher, Miss Reed, dancing with a small boy.
Yes, but it's a lot of fun for both the children and the teacher.
Have you ever attended a pupil's birthday party?
No, I never have, but I think it would be a good way to get to know the children.
Mm-hmm. Parties and visits are over for the day. It's evening and Miss Svirsevska is at home. She has few free evenings and she's preparing for her master's degree. A glance at her bookshelves reveals the wide range of her studies and interests. Happily, she has non-academic interests also. She lives in this pleasant apartment with her mother. Her mother, it seems, has dozed off. Study, the inevitable lifetime lot of any teacher, and of course the inevitable homework of all teachers, going over the day's work of her class. Something you're free of for the moment, Miss Reed.
But only for the moment.
The following morning, and we're back in the classroom for the start of another day. The only reason for returning is to discover if the visit to Casimir's home was successful. The concerned teacher looks among her brood for yesterday's truant. There he is, neat and eager. 24 hours in the life of Barbara Svirsevska.
Dzień dobry, dzieci. Siadajcie. Bąk Ania, Brzozowski Janusz.
Well, from what we've seen, it's fairly evident that the Polish teacher is a person of some consequence.
Yes, and I thought it was a frank enough presentation, you know, no propaganda, children with problems, some poor, some not so poor. All in all, I thought it was very frank and engaging.
What's your impression of your Polish colleague, Miss Reed?
I was impressed. She seemed very intelligent, very absorbed in her work, and very good with the children.
Yes, I agree with Miss Reed completely. She had a wonderful personality, and one would guess that she'd be a pretty good teacher.
What would have given you a reverse impression? What constitutes a bad teacher?
Well, a person who exhibits coldness or aloofness, or who's driving or nagging, and who's unable to sustain interest by warmth and imagination. And I think the key factor we saw in this Polish teacher and this Japanese teacher was that they were genuinely interested themselves and were able to sustain interest in the children because their interest was genuine. I think very often the poor teacher is the one who doesn't have a genuine interest.
Is there anything like the PTA in Poland?
No, but there are what are called parents' committees, which reportedly have a say in the life and administration of the schools.
Some share in the educational direction of the school?
I couldn't be certain of that. What are your feelings about PTA, Miss Reed?
Well, I think it's very good, but I do also think that there should be some direct contact between the parent and the teacher. What do you think, Professor Seeley?
Well, yes, of course. I don't think anyone supposes really that PTA is a substitute for face-to-face dealing with parents. But it does do some things. It allows parents to share their problems and their solutions and their views. And not quite so fortunately, it permits the school to tell them what it wants them to know.
Well, do you suggest then that in our system, the professional educator is dominant and that the parent has no strong voice?
Yes, the professional educator is very much in charge. It's true that he's subject to a board of education and to government policy and that parents elect the government, but this is pretty nominal.
But finally, the parent does control education.
Well, in that attenuated sense, yes.
I see. Would you feel that in her individual manner, attitudes, and values that Barbara Svirsevska is any less free than any Canadian teacher?
Yes, we all know that Poland is a totalitarian state, and so we must assume that teaching in all its forms must conform to state policy.
Oh, of course, but we too live in a mass society, and in a mass society you have educational product pretty nearly as standardized as industrial product. And if you want standardization, of course, you have to have control. So the state here too, just like there, controls very closely texts and curriculum, as you know, and even methods, and that doesn't really allow much room for creative teaching, I think.
Many people in Canada and the United States feel that European educational standards are higher than ours, that the student is better trained and more advanced.
Well, I think that's true, particularly in the earlier grades.
Why, would you say? Better schools, better methods?
Well, I think more and harder work and study far earlier. And the way it comes out is that, generally speaking, they're ahead of us all the way up to the PhD or equivalent level, and then our students seem to come out pretty well like theirs.
We might pursue this point after having a look at ourselves, specifically at a school and a teacher in Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue in the province of Quebec. Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue is a town about 25 miles southwest of Montreal. Though it's predominantly French-speaking, there is a sizable English-speaking community, and our school is an English-language Protestant school. You see some of the pupils, most of them fairly happy about the start of another school day.
Another winter situation.
Yes, it's a brisk January morning. This is Graham Smith, a 7th grade teacher. Smith is a married man with 2 small children. He's been teaching for 12 years, during which time he achieved a BA degree by taking night courses. Time now for the day's work to begin. The youngsters you see are assembled by classes. This is something we didn't see in the other situation. First business of the day for Smith's class is a science lesson.
Now, boys and girls, but if you look around for a moment, you realize that there are numerous differences in the materials that you're looking at. for example, let's take a look at the two that are halfway down the table, just in front of John. Now, John, what do you think 11 is, and what do you think 13 happens to be?
Well, that's something,
Yes.
and, well, that's nothing.
Well, nothing might be a way of describing it, but I think if we thought for a few moments, we might be able to come up with another word. Well, Marcia,
Well, number 11's a solid and number 13's a gas.
do you agree with that, Roy?
This seems rather elementary compared to the Japanese example.
Yes, as Miss Reed said earlier, though, the Japanese probably encourage the practical, technical skills at an earlier age than we do.
Here we have a kindergarten group. This school ranges from kindergarten to grade 11. Perhaps the whole school is a little special since it's linked to MacDonald College, a teacher's college which is part of McGill University. And so in facilities and method, it may be a little above average.
Well, certainly the classes seem smaller. Most classrooms in this country are much more crowded. In other ways, of course, it does seem typical of any urban school in Canada.
This is a grade 11 class.
Tobacco, for example. The people of Western Europe smoked, therefore the people of Russia must smoke.
Here we have the teacher's room, scene of constant discussion of school and student. Are we short of teachers across the country, Professor Seeley?
Yes, I hear we need about 25,000 more teachers.
Aren't there more people entering the profession these days?
Well, despite better salaries and working conditions, we still have a very serious shortage, although we are getting more teachers now.
Boys, I have a basketball practice.
Do you think perhaps we demand too much of our teachers? Should they be expected to supervise sports, dramatic productions, and recreation as well as teach?
Well, extracurricular activity can be as beneficial to the teacher as it is to the student if it isn't overdone. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Reed?
Yes. If there's too much activity, nothing can get done well, and it's exhausting for the teacher. But in reasonable quantities, I think it's very enjoyable.
Now, for the past few weeks, we've been
Back now to academic work. In this sequence, perhaps you'll have a better chance to judge both the teacher and his pupils.
For a volunteer to come out and point out the physical features of France, beginning in the east and ending in the west. Volunteers? Steffi. Now, who would like to name the first in the east, the first physical feature of France? Well, Jane.
The Alps? The Alps are right here.
And the second physical feature that comes to mind? Alice?
The Mount Salem River Valley?
That's right here.
And the third?
This
Marshall?
boy is Derek Bryson, and not too attentive.
Now, what effect do the physical features of France that we have here have on the, thank you, Steffi, have on the climate of France itself? Now, let's take a look at the map of France once again. What word would you use in describing the climate of the west coast of France in general? Cora?
Wet?
Correct. And let's drop down again to the Riviera, right here. Derek, how would you describe the climate of the Riviera? Help him out, someone. Bruce.
Hot,
Hot. Perhaps another word. Jane.
dry,
Hot and dry. Derek, what would your answer be this time if I asked that question?
Derek's diffidence is well marked by Smith, and he follows up on it, as you'll see.
Derek's report was so bad, I'm really worried.
No, thank you, not now.
He just seems so offhand and unhappy, I guess. It's hard to know why. He has everything a boy could want.
Does he have a particular interest or hobby?
He loves to swim, and he's good at it, too.
I didn't know that because he's shown very little interest in the school sports program.
Unfortunately, he hasn't.
That seems to be his main trouble. He shows very little interest in anything at school. He does have the ability to do well academically. Tell me, Mrs. Bryson, what does your husband think?
Well, he travels a great deal. He's away now, and he doesn't realize Derek's problem. Of course, he thinks I exaggerate, and I think he's not home enough to realize that something's wrong.
Does Derek have any friends in the immediate neighborhood?
Point of information. Apart from special cases such as Derek's, Graham Smith and his colleagues try to visit with every parent at least once a year, which eats up many hours of the teacher's leisure time.
Derek seems to be a lonely boy.
But then why doesn't he try to make friends? That's his trouble. He doesn't try. He just gives up. But why?
Well, that's what we've got to find out. And I think if we attempt to try and understand his problems at home and at school, we might make some headway.
Well, I hope so. Will you have some more tea?
Gee, no thanks. I'm a little late now and I've got to leave.
Do you think, Professor Seeley, that we tend to worry too much about being part of the group?
Yes, I think we're a very groupy society. We know everybody needs some friends, and Derek could have a special problem. But generally, we seem to be so anxious for our children to be good members of the group, as we say, that we don't give them time to find themselves, to find their own individuality.
The rocket is the simplest example of jet propulsion.
While Graham Smith hurries home, a few financial facts about the Smiths. His salary is $7,000 a year from teaching. He works every summer at a variety of jobs to augment the family income. Smith has literally never had a real holiday in 12 years. This diligence supports a fair standard of living for the Smiths. They can afford a car and a pleasant home and a pleasant community.
Hi.
No maid or babysitter or doting grandmother here, however, and Smith must stand by home and children while his wife goes out shopping.
Feed the children if they get hungry. I won't be long.
Don't worry too much about them. They'll be all right.
Bye, children.
Hi, bud. Bring my briefcase in, will you, Ian? Come on, Andrea. Say hi to Daddy. Come on. Come and say hi to Daddy. Come and say hi to Daddy. Thanks, Ian.
Daddy, can I listen to you?
Yes, later on you can. Sure, if you're a good little boy.
No.
In a few minutes.
Please.
Where's Andrea gone? Dolly.
Husband, father, babysitter, basketball coach, teacher. Graham Smith. Well, what did you think of our Canadian teacher?
I think Mr. Smith is well above average.
Yes, I liked him too. I thought he had personality, and he seemed courteous and capable and interested, and I thought genuine.
Assuming there's room for improvement, and I suppose there always is, how might we improve the general caliber of our Canadian teaching? In what ways? Higher standards, more and better training, more pay, or what?
Well, I think more pay is part of it. If the rewards were greater, then the profession would attract more and better teachers.
But that can't be all, can it? Because obviously you yourself could do better financially in any one of half a dozen lines.
Well, naturally, money is not the sole consideration, but it's an important one.
Oh, yes, I don't question that for a moment, but I think you'd admit that there are other equally important considerations. I think probably teachers need longer and harder, more intensive study courses. They should have increased bursaries and scholarships to enable them to take such courses, and a number of things like that. But perhaps more important than any of these, I think to do their job effectively, they need much greater recognition. Recognition that the work they do is at least as important as that of the industrialist, or the lawyer, or the doctor.
How about our educational system apart from the teacher? Is it appropriate to our times and to our needs?
Well, possibly a majority do feel that they're getting what they want, but you'd agree, wouldn't you, that a minority, and probably a growing one, feels that we're not getting what this nation needs, especially in times like these.
Well, how do you see these needs, Professor Seeley? Less popular education, perhaps a return to more classical education?
No, I don't think that, and indeed I don't disapprove of the diversity. I think we have to continue to make use of all levels of competence and intelligence.
We're committed to this system to considerable
Indeed,
extent.
indeed. But I think there could be a vastly greater place for thought, for ideas, and that we could ask our children to work a lot harder in such a way as to really test the limits of their competence.
Well, don't we already do this to a fair extent?
No, I think not really. Basically, we think in terms of certificates and job competence and academic credits and so on. We're really half-hearted about intellect, and we certainly turn out sloppy thinkers in our educational system in matters where exactitude is important, and routine thinkers in matters where imagination is important.
What do you think, Miss Reed? Are we sloppy thinkers?
Well, I do agree that we need more toughness in the school, but I'm positive that we do not tolerate sloppy thinking.
Well, I can only reply on the basis of the sample I have as a parent with 4 children at different times in different schools, and as a professor receiving them at a still further stage of the educational process. I'm deeply shocked by how inexact they can permit themselves to be, and even how inexact they can be in their work and still get an A from their teacher. This bothers me.
The real problem, perhaps, is a social one. If our concerns and values are at fault, then our educational system can be faulty.
Well, it certainly is a social problem.
Well, doesn't it follow, then, that we must change our social patterns before we can possibly change our educational patterns?
Well, not quite. You know, this is a constant chicken and egg business. If you change the educational pattern, you begin to change the society. If you begin to change the society, it usually follows that you change the educational pattern. But education is as good a place to begin as anywhere. And I think if we're sagacious enough and bold enough to admit the defects in the educational system, and if we have the will also to do something about them, we could start off with the present educational structure, gradually make it over, wait for changes in the society to occur, and for these to be reflected in turn in the school. It isn't an either-or thing.
Well, finally, may I presume to sum up this last conversation? Your findings, Professor Seeley, more zeal and intensity in our teachers, much greater emphasis on thought and ideas in the content of our education. In short, harder work and deeper thinking all around.
And general public recognition of the vital role of the teacher.
Ah, yes.
Yes, and I would want to add general public recognition of the role of the parent, who has been kept, I think, very much on the periphery by the professionals. Could I add another thing? We may have seemed somewhat critical, and I'd hope that no dedicated teacher or principal or school board member in the audience would feel that he was personally being criticized. It's out of our common concern for Canadian children and the Canadian educational system that all these comments have been made.
I'm sure you'd number Miss Reed among the dedicated teachers.
Yes, I certainly would.
Thank you very much, sir.
Well, we've ranged far afield from our 4 teachers, but properly so, I think. And I want to thank you both very much.
It's been a pleasure.